It is a quiet Tuesday morning on Route 30, just outside Lancaster. The sun is barely over the tree line, cutting through the heavy valley fog, but the gas station is already busy. A Ford pickup truck pulls in. The driver leaves the engine idling for a moment, then steps out into the cold air to pump fuel. The numbers on the screen roll by fast. $3.29 a gallon. $62 later, the tank is full. The driver clicks the cap and heads on to work. Then the next car pulls up. Then a minivan. The average American family will watch those numbers roll by until they have spent about $3,000 this year, just to run errands, visit the grocery store, and get the kids to school. Now, stop for a second. Look across the asphalt. Right over the two-lane road, a horse-drawn buggy comes around the bend, the iron-shod hooves making a rhythmic, steady click-clack against the shoulder of the highway. Inside sits an old-order Amish family. The husband holds the leather reins loosely. His wife sits beside him in a plain blue dress. 3 children quiet in the back. The buggy passes the gas station without a glance. It is heading 5 miles over to a doctor's appointment, then to the produce market, then home. Today, that family will spend exactly $0 on gasoline. Yesterday, they spent $0. Last year, almost nothing. Understand this clearly. I am not here to tell you a romantic fairy tale. We Amish are practical people, not museum exhibits. We do buy some gasoline. We hire English drivers with vans for trips too far for a horse. We pay for fuel to run a generator when the milk house needs it, and some families use diesel engines to turn water pumps or grain mills. But our day-to-day life moves by horse, by hand, by gravity, and by sunlight. Our fuel footprint is a tiny fraction of what our English neighbors spend. That is not an accident. It is by design. But the question I want to walk you through today is not about how we live right now. It is about what grew in our fields for over 200 years before the word gasoline was even a part of the language. Think about that. How did a whole county of massive productive farms feed thousands of families, run local industries, and build wealth without a single drop of petroleum? They used a plant, a specific, deep-rooting plant that put food on Pennsylvania Dutch farm tables for generations, gave whole townships their names, and was eventually locked away by a federal law in 1937. It is the plant that many Amish families are growing again today, legally, in the exact same soil our great-grandfathers plowed 3 centuries ago. I am Elias Yoder. I am Amish, and I farm here in Lancaster County. I want to show you the plain truth of this forgotten field crop, the history the old folks kept alive, the law that buried it, and the old knowledge that is coming back out of the dirt. Let us look at the beginning, plainly. In 1683, the Pennsylvania General Assembly passed one of its very first colonial laws, explicitly encouraging every single farmer to put hemp into the ground. 2 years later, William Penn wrote that hemp should be one of the 4 main staples of trade for the entire colony. By the 1720s, the government wanted this fiber so badly, they paid cash bounties for every pound a farmer brought to market. Why? Because hemp was the hidden engine of the early world. It was the rope that held the ships together, the canvas sails that caught the wind, the heavy grain bags in every barn, the rugged trousers on a farmer's back, and the paper that legal deeds were signed on. Our soil here took to it naturally. By 1729, when the colony drew the boundaries for Lancaster County, they named the central township directly after the crop that covered the fields, Hempfield Township. The name was not poetic. It was a simple description of the landscape. If you drive through East or West Hempfield today, you are crossing roads named for a plant that hasn't been seen there in 3 generations. To understand the sheer scale of what our grandfathers were doing, you have to look at what they built to handle the harvest. Between 1720 and 1870, there were more than 100 water-powered hemp mills turning along the creeks of Lancaster County. I have walked the ruins of these places with historians who have spent 20 years tracking them down. The old millers used a tool called a hemp stone. Imagine a massive, cone-shaped wheel of solid limestone or granite, weighing nearly 2,000 pounds. A single wooden axle ran through the center, hooked to an ox or a water wheel, forcing that 2-ton stone to roll around in a heavy circular stone trough. The harvested stalks were laid in the path, and as the heavy stone rolled over them with a dull, crushing rumble, it split the tough outer fibers away from the woody inner core without tearing them. Today, those stones sit in local museums or as decorative markers in front of old stone houses, heavy, silent witnesses to an industry that once moved millions of pounds of fiber every autumn. Every part of that plant had a destination on the traditional farm. The long fibers went to the weavers for linen sheets, durable work clothes, and suspenders that would outlive the man wearing them. The seeds were taken to local oil mills where heavy wooden presses squeezed out a thick green-gold oil. That oil didn't go into an engine. It went into the glass lamps that lit the kitchen table during long winter nights. It went into the soap kettle, into the varnish for the farm wagons, and into the frying pan. The leftover seed mash, dry and dense as cake, was broken up and fed to the dairy cows to keep their coats thick and their milk rich through the frost. Even the tough inner core of the stalk was burned into a clean, smokeless charcoal for blacksmithing, or used as soft, absorbent bedding in the horse stalls. In 1794, George Washington himself rode his horse down to the village of Paradise, right here in the county, just to watch one of these local hemp mills operate. He was growing the crop at Mount Vernon, but he knew the Pennsylvania Dutch had perfected the machinery. The first president of the country came to our valley to learn how to handle a plant that filled every gap in the household economy. From the founding of the colony until the mid-1800s, this culture was nearly universal. Almost every farm cleared a few acres for it because a single seasonal planting gave a family their clothes, their light, their sacks, and their soap. It allowed the local economy to circulate entirely within the boundaries of the township, independent of imported goods or foreign trade. But then the world shifted. In August of 1937, the federal government passed the Marijuana Tax Act. Now, there are many complicated stories told about why this happened, tales of industrial conspiracies, secret corporate meetings, and paper mills trying to kill off competition. The reality in the records is much more bureaucratic. The law didn't outright ban the crop. It placed a heavy tax stamp on every single transaction involving the cannabis family, wrapped it in mountains of registration paperwork, and made the legal penalties for a simple bookkeeping mistake severe. For a plain farmer who didn't like dealing with federal offices, the message was clear. The paperwork was too heavy, the risk was too high, and the tax took the profit out of the barn. Within a few seasons, the hemp fields went quiet. The great 2-ton hemp stones stopped rolling. The water wheels were diverted to corn grist, and an 80-year silence fell over the fields. 3 generations of farmers grew up knowing how to grow corn, tobacco, and alfalfa. But they never once touched the seed their great-grandfathers relied upon. The practical know-how, the exact depth to drop the seed, the timing of the retting process where the dew rots the outer stalk just enough to free the fiber, the feel of the stalk when it is ready for the stone, began to thin out, kept alive only in old journals and stories told on winter evenings. Then, the law changed again. With the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, the restriction was lifted for industrial strains carrying less than 0.3% of the compound that alters the mind. The crop became legal again, overnight, on the exact same terms as wheat or oats. And the folks who remember the old ways were ready. By 2023, the green, jagged leaves of the plant were back in the Lancaster soil, growing on Amish-operated farms without synthetic fertilizers, tended by horses and harvested by hand. The cycle had reconnected. But here is where the real problem lies for a modern person looking at this history. If you think you can just buy a sack of seed, throw it in the ground, and suddenly free yourself from the grocery store or the gas station, you are missing the hardest truth of the old knowledge. The old folks didn't just understand the plant. They understood a complex physical process of hand labor and timing that makes modern machinery look simple. If you do it wrong, you end up with nothing but a field of rotting weeds and a broken back. To actually make this plant useful on a practical homestead today, to turn that green stalk into something you can spin, burn, or use to seal a structure, requires a specific sequence of steps that the old millers perfected over 200 years ago. And it begins with a tool most people have never seen and a physical test that you have to perform with your own bare hands right in the middle of the field. The test is simple, but if you skip it, the rest of your labor is wasted. You walk out into the field when the morning dew has just dried from the leaves. It is late August, and the air carries that heavy, green, resinous smell. Sweet, slightly bitter, like wild hops and damp earth mixed together. You reach down and grip a single stalk near the base. It should be the thickness of a common pencil, smooth and turning from a bright apple green to a dull yellowish tan near the dirt. You snap it between your thumbs. Listen closely to that sound. It shouldn't bend like a fresh willow switch, nor should it crumble into dust. It needs to give a sharp, clean crack, revealing the inner core. A hollow, woody tube we call the hurdle, wrapped in a skin of fibers so tough you cannot tear them with your teeth. If that outer skin peels away in one long, unbroken ribbon from root to top, the field is ready for the blade. Now, understand this. The biggest mistake a beginner makes is rushing to the harvest with modern machinery. A high-speed mower will choke on these fibers within 10 feet, wrapping the tough strands around the rotating shafts until the friction smells of burning rubber and the gears jam solid. The old folks used a heavy horse-drawn sickle bar moving at a slow, measured pace or a simple hand scythe. You want to cut the stalks as close to the crown of the root as the steel will allow, laying them down flat, side by side, in neat, long rows right across the stubble. This brings us to the most critical stage of the whole process, a step the old Pennsylvania Dutch called retting. It is nothing more than controlled rotting, but it requires your full attention. You leave the cut stalks lying in the field for 3 to 4 weeks, letting the weather do the heavy lifting. Every morning, the heavy valley fog settles over the rows, soaking the stalks. Every afternoon, the late summer sun bakes them dry. This constant shift between damp and dry allows the natural bacteria in the soil to slowly eat away the sticky pectins, the natural glue that binds the usable outer fiber to the useless inner wood. During these weeks, you must walk the rows. Turn the stalks over once a week using a long wooden rake so both sides weather evenly. You will smell the change. The bright, sharp green scent fades away, replaced by the deep, rich, musty smell of autumn woods and damp straw. The color will shift too, turning a dark, weathered slate gray. To know exactly when to stop the process, gather a handful of stalks and twist them in opposite directions. If the woody core shatters and drops out like dry corn husks, leaving nothing but clean gray ribbons of fiber in your palms, the retting is finished. If you leave them on the ground a week too long, the bacteria will eat the fiber itself, and your crop will turn to useless mush under the winter rains. Once dry, the stalks are gathered into bundles, tied with a simple twine, and brought into the dry air of the barn. Now you are ready for the mechanical breaking. Since you likely do not have a 2-ton water-powered hemp stone sitting in your creek, you must use the traditional, hand-operated tool that every household kept in the barn shed. The hand brake. Imagine a long wooden bench made of heavy white oak, about 4 feet long. The top of the bench consists of 3 parallel wooden blades, dull and rounded on the edges. Hinged to one end is a long wooden lever holding 2 matching blades that drop down precisely into the gaps between the lower 3. You hold a bundle of the dry gray stalks across the lower blades with your left hand, keeping your fingers well back. With your right hand, you lift the heavy oak lever and bring it down firmly onto the hemp. The sound is a rhythmic, heavy thud-clack that fills the quiet of the barn. The wooden blades do not cut the plant. They bend it sharply at acute angles. Because the inner core is brittle from the retting, it shatters into thousands of tiny, cream-colored woody chips called herds. The outer fiber, being incredibly flexible, simply bends without breaking. With every stroke of the lever, you draw the bundle towards you, clearing the wood from the length of the stalk, a thick cloud of fine gray dust, soft as talc and smelling of dry hay, will rise around you, and the broken wood will pile up high around your boots. When you finish, you are left holding a tangled, rough horsetail of gray fiber, still full of small wooden splinters. To clean it, you move to the scutching board. This is nothing but a vertical oak board standing chest high. You drape the handful of fiber over the top edge of the board and use a flat wooden paddle, shaped like a large carving knife, to scrape downward against the hanging strands. You work with a steady, sweeping stroke, brushing the remaining bits of wood out onto the floor until the fiber hangs straight and clean, the final step before the spinning wheel can touch. It is called heckling or combing. You need a heckle board, which is a block of wood studded with rows of long, sharp steel spikes, tapering down from coarse to fine, looking much like a bed of nails. You take your bundle of fiber, wrap the end tightly around your hand, and fling the loose tail forward into the spikes, drawing it through the teeth toward you. The first pass through the coarse spikes will feel heavy and stubborn. It will catch and pull, tearing away the short, tangled, coarse fibers. These shorter fibers are not waste. They are called tow. The old folks saved the tow to spin into heavy rope, to twist into rough grain sacks, or to pack into the seams of log cabins and water pipes to stop leaks. But as you move the remaining bundle to the finer spikes, the resistance disappears. The fibers slide through the steel teeth with a soft, hissing whisper. Look at what is left in your hand. The rough, gray, dirty stalk you cut from the dirt a month ago is completely gone. In its place you are holding a long, shimmering hank of line hemp. It is a pale, creamy silver blonde color, as soft to the touch as a horse's mane, but stronger than any cotton or wool known to man. It is completely clean, smelling faintly of old linen and summer wind. This is the raw material that kept our ancestors independent. From this point, it can be split into fine threads on a flax wheel for clothing, twisted into heavy cordage on a rope walk, or boiled down with wood ash to create a pulp for paper that will not yellow or tear for 300 years. But knowing how to produce the clean fiber is only half the battle. The old folks knew that if you stopped here, you were leaving the most immediate practical survival fuel on the barn floor, the mountain of woody chips. The herds that you smashed out with the handbrake holds the secret to a forgotten form of masonry that can completely insulate a structure for generations, using nothing but the waste from your field and a common stone froe, the creek bed, the exact ratio of that traditional mix. And the way you pack it into a wall, so it breathes without rotting, requires a specific understanding of lime and water that most modern builders have completely forgotten. Stop and think about what just happened on that barn floor. We took a plant that grew from a tiny seed in 90 days, smashed it with a wooden beam, and separated it into two completely different materials. A fiber as soft as silk and a pile of woody chips. There is no modern chemistry here, no industrial heat, and no electricity. Yet, what is left behind is a material that defies the way we think about modern building supplies. To understand why those cream-colored woody chips, the herds, can insulate a home for generations, you have to look at how the plant grew in the first place. If you examine a hemp stalk under a magnifying glass, you will see it is not solid wood like an oak branch. It is a network of microscopic, hollow tubes running from the root to the leaves. When the plant is alive, these tubes act like millions of tiny straws, drawing water and nutrients up from the deep Lancaster soil. When we dry and shatter the stalk, those microscopic straw tubes stay intact. But now they are filled with nothing but air. This is the exact scientific principle behind almost all insulation: trapped air. Think of a wool blanket on a cold night. The wool itself doesn't create heat. The curly fibers simply trap a layer of still air next to your skin, and that air prevents your body heat from escaping. The hemp hurd does the exact same thing on a massive scale. When you mix those porous chips with a binder like slaked lime and pack it into a wall, you are creating a barrier made of millions of tiny sealed air pockets. Heat tries to move through the wall, but it gets lost in that endless maze of microscopic air pockets and slows down to a crawl. But the chemistry of the old folks goes one step deeper. When you mix the hemp hurds with lime and water, a slow, beautiful reaction begins. The lime doesn't just dry like modern Portland cement. It absorbs carbon dioxide right out of the air around it. Over decades, that lime slowly turns back into limestone. It is a process called carbonation. The stone is literally petrifying the hemp chips inside the wall. The result is a material that behaves like nothing else. It is dense enough to block the wind, yet it remains completely breathable. Think of a modern house wrapped in plastic sheets. If moisture gets inside the walls of a modern home, it gets trapped, turns into black mold, and rots the wooden studs from the inside out. But a hemp lime wall acts like a heavy wool coat. If the air inside the house is damp from cooking or washing, the wall absorbs that moisture into its tiny pores without losing its strength. When the sun comes out and the air dries, the wall breathes that moisture right back out into the world. The old folks didn't have a word for hygroscopic vapor permeability, but they knew that a house built this way stayed bone dry, smelled fresh, and never rotted. Now, let us be completely honest about the limitations. I promised you the plain truth, and this is where many modern folks get carried away by enthusiasm and make costly mistakes. Hemp is a wonderful plant, but it is not a miracle cure for every problem, and it has hard boundaries where it will fail you completely. First, understand this. Hemp lime masonry has almost zero structural strength. It cannot support a roof. You cannot build a wall out of pure hemp and lime and expect it to hold up your ceiling. If you try, the weight will slowly crush the material like stale cake, and the structure will collapse. The old builders always used a heavy wooden timber frame, thick bents of oak or pine, to carry the weight of the roof and floors. The hemp lime mix is strictly an infill. It is a blanket wrapped around a solid skeleton. Second, this material hates standing water. While it handles vapor and humidity beautifully, it cannot tolerate being submerged or constantly soaked from the bottom. If you try to use a hemp lime mix for a foundation below the ground, or if you let rainwater pool at the base of the wall, the lime will degrade, and the hemp chips will eventually rot into mulch. You must always build a solid stone, brick, or concrete foundation that sits at least a foot above the dirt to keep the hemp away from splashing rain and rising groundwater. Third, the climate dictates where this works and where it doesn't. Because the lime cures by absorbing carbon dioxide and drying slowly over weeks, you cannot place this material during a freezing winter. If the water inside the wet mix freezes before the lime has formed its chemical bond, the crystals will shatter internally, and the wall will turn to soft powder when the spring thaw comes. It requires a long, warm summer window to dry completely throughout its thickness. Finally, you must consider the scale of your own labor. This is a heavy, slow process. A wall built this way must be packed by hand into temporary wooden forms, a few inches at a time, using a wooden rammer. It is an extraordinary amount of physical work. If you are looking for a quick, cheap afternoon project to fix a drafty wall, this is not it. It takes a community, or a long season of patient, daily labor to see it through. The old folks didn't mind the labor because they looked at time differently. They weren't trying to finish a house in a weekend. They were trying to build something that their great-grandchildren would inherit without a mortgage. Now that you understand the science of the air pockets, the chemistry of the lime, and the strict boundaries of where the material can and cannot be trusted, we must look at how to actually mix these elements together on the ground. Achieving the exact consistency, Knowing the feel of the mix when it has just enough water to bind, but not so much that it chokes the air pores, is a precise craft that relies entirely on a simple bucket test. The bucket test is where the old world meets the new, a simple hand check that ensures the mix is right. But before we look into the tub, stop and understand that this way of building did not start in our Pennsylvania valleys. The careful old folks here were simply remembering a truth that had already preserved homes across Europe for centuries. If you travel to the old towns of Germany, France, or England, you will find timber-framed houses that have stood since the 1400s. Their wooden bones are still straight, and the infill between the beams is as hard as bedrock. When modern researchers began testing those ancient walls, they didn't find advanced industrial chemicals. They found a mixture of hemp herds, clay, and lime. In France, the material is known historically as béton de chanvre. Architects there, rediscovering the old methods in the late 20th century, discovered that historic homes insulated with this plantstone mix required almost no modern heating or cooling. The material had been quietly doing its job for 500 years without a single mechanical repair or insulation replacement. Modern science has spent the last few decades verifying exactly what those old builders knew by instinct. If you look at the agricultural bulletins and engineering reports coming out of institutions like the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture or the international laboratories testing low-carbon building materials, the data is plain. A standard 12-inch wall of packed hemp lime creates an extraordinary thermal barrier. It doesn't just block the cold, it stores heat in its mass during the day and slowly releases it into the house at night. Furthermore, testing by organizations like the National Institute of Standards and Technology has shown that, because the hemp chips are coated in mineral lime, the resulting wall is completely fireproof. You can hold a propane torch directly against the material for hours, and it will not ignite, smoke, or release toxic gases. The lime seals the plant material away from oxygen, making it impossible for a flame to take hold. Think about the weight of that evidence. The very same plant that the government pushed out of our fields in 1937 is now recognized by modern environmental engineering as one of the most sustainable, high-performing building materials on the planet. It captures carbon while it grows in the dirt, locks that carbon inside a wall for centuries, and protects a family from fire, mold, and winter cold using nothing more than what can be raised on a few acres of local soil. The 2018 Farm Bill didn't just give us back a crop, it gave us back our independence from the industrial supply chain. It reconnected us to a tradition where a man's home is grown from his own fields, built by his own hands, and maintained by the natural laws of the earth. Now, look at your own hands. You don't need a $1 million factory, a specialized degree, or an expensive contractor to begin using this old knowledge. You can start small, just like our ancestors did when they first arrived in this wilderness. Build a simple wooden box for a garden tool shed. Frame a small poultry coop in your backyard using regular pine lumber. Gather a few sacks of industrial hemp herds from a local agricultural supplier. Pick up a bag of hydrated lime from the building supply store and mix them together in a common wheelbarrow with a little clean water. Pack that mixture into your wooden forms using a simple piece of scrap oak as a rammer. Watch how it cures over the summer weeks. Touch the texture when it is dry. Feel how solid, warm, and quiet it makes that small space. Understand this. The real secret of self-sufficiency isn't about hiding away from the world or waiting for a crisis. It is about choosing to understand the simple materials that God put on this earth and learning how to work with them patiently, with respect for the design of nature. It is about replacing a monthly bill with a piece of traditional craft that lasts. The next time you drive down Route 30 or any two-lane highway across this country, look at the landscape differently. Look past the gas stations, the plastic-wrapped suburban houses, and the heavy utility wires. Look at the dirt. The history of true independence is right there under the grass. waiting for a generation patient enough to plant the seed, turn the stone, and build something that will outlive them. The old knowledge was never truly lost. It was just waiting for us to stop, think, and remember how to use it.